Uh, what is this? This is Forward Live. I had to think about this because I'm doing a lot of different broadcasts, and so I had to kind of get my shit together there for a minute. So please forgive me on that. And also, I need to change my overlay. Magic. So if you are watching this on TikTok, welcome. If you're watching on Instagram, and I'm hoping that this is going on Instagram, working on that. If you're watching on Instagram, be sure to like and subscribe to this because if you like and subscribe, it moves the algorithm and it helps to move this up in the viewing, and also it'll help you get notifications of when I go live sooner. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click subscribe and click the bell so that you get the notifications. So it's been a couple of weeks since I've done the Forward Live podcast, and so it's I guess I'm a little out of sorts. But the good news is, number one, I'm on vacation, such as it is, so I'm not actually working. I have time to work on different things and experiment on some things, and so we're doing things like with the Freeology projects that we're getting nice overlays for our videos and things like that. So it's coming along. It's coming along. 2023 is going to be a fantastic year, and I'm really excited about it. And that brings me to the title of tonight's broadcast, and it's this: Happy Endings. Happy Endings. Um, and you know what? I just realized that I didn't change the title on the for the live streams going to Facebook and YouTube. But anyway, I can fix that afterward. You know, it's better to do it and apologize than to not do it at all. So anyway, happy endings. We're coming up on the end of 2022, and one of the things that I'm big on is I don't believe in happy endings. And at face value, that will sound kind of pessimistic. You'll be like, hey, well, Derek, what do you mean you don't like happy endings? Well, everybody likes a happy ending, but I don't. And here's why. I believe in a happy story. Um, Stories are not always happy. Sometimes stories are sad. Sometimes stories are challenging. Sometimes stories are messy. Sometimes, and that's just kind of the way stories go. And um, here's the thing: you are the author of your own story. Don't get me wrong. You are the author. You shape, control, and determine the path of your story. Now, there are a lot of independent variables in your story, and those are things that you can't control. Now, you can control your reaction to them. You can control what your response to them are, but you can't control those independent variables. But I want to talk specifically about endings because we're coming up on the end of the year, and some people will say, "Well, I didn't achieve everything that I wanted to achieve this year, Derek, so it's not a happy ending for me." Or, Derek, I lost a loved one, I lost my job, or I lost my home. Whatever your loss is, and if you have any losses, I deeply empathize with you because we all have things that we lose. There are loved ones that I've lost both recently and earlier in the year, and that's part of life. Um, but one of the things that I've learned is when you say, "And they all lived happily ever after." The end, right? It's the way a lot of stories end, a lot of fairy tales and that we've learned as children. They end that way, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, when you talk about happily ever after, you're not talking about the end. In reality, that's the beginning. Basically, you heard a story that contained some challenges, that contained some struggles, that contained some setbacks. and also some happy things, some triumphs, some successes. But when you get to that point where and they all lived happily ever after, this is where the real story begins. And that's the story that often goes untold. So when you get to the point where you don't want to look so much for happily ever after as an ending, you want to look at happily ever after as the beginning. And what is this pivot that transitions from that previous story into this story? And how does that impact the rest of your life? How does that change things for you? I, this is one of these things that's really really challenging because one of the things that people look at, they look at uh, finality, finality, and endings are always like the end. But you have to understand is that a lot of times endings are really grand beginnings. And one of my case studies in this, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he was alive, he was considered an enemy of the state. He wasn't this beloved figure that we have idealized him to be today. He wasn't that guy. When Dr. King was walking the earth, he was considered to be a threat to the United States government. And he was a threat to the traditional way of American life. But when an assassin's bullet took him out of this world on April 4th, 1968. And I remember that very clearly because I was what was I, 6 years old, almost 6 years old, almost 6 years old. And but I remember that day because my dad and I both had a cold, and we were lying in the bed watching TV, and I remember it. I remember it like it was yesterday. But anyway, I say this to say that when Dr. King died, something changed in the narrative around him. And he went from being a villain in the American lexicon to being a hero. In other words, Dr. King planted seeds for trees for which he would never enjoy the shade or the fruit of. So his ending was a beginning for the legacy of what he stood for, the legacy of his wife, Coretta Scott King, and his children, Yolanda, Bernice, Dexter, and Martin III. It was a beginning. Now, here's the thing: it's an ending, and endings are often viewed as sad, and certainly children losing their father, a wife losing her husband, parents losing a son. All that's definitely sad, but there was something that happened that transformed the mindset of a nation. I hope you guys are seeing where I'm going with this because we all have a date with death. We all have a time where our mortal coil, our bodies, our vessel will end. We all have that time. But how you live your story today will determine what the pivot looks like. In other words, will your end simply be the end, or will your end be a beginning? And that all depends on you. It depends on your mindset. Are you willing to live your life in such a way that the possibility is that greater for you will be on the other side of what we know to be life. And that's a challenge because at the end of the day, none of us want to die. Death is something that it's fear inducing to us. We're not really certain about death, but it's something that comes to everyone. But here's the thing, endings are not always death. See, you can have the end of a job, the end of a marriage, the end of a relationship, the end of a business, the end of a homestead. And all of these things represent a closing of a chapter. And this is the thing that you can decide if that ending is something that's going to be hurtful, if that ending is something that's going to represent something final. And you have to understand that the time, we understand time in a very linear fashion, but time is very multidimensional, and time also, it has no beginning that we can trace, and it has no ending that we can predict. Time is infinite, and we occupy but a tiny slice of it. But the thing is that you being here, you are the legacy of someone else. You are the dream of someone else. And likewise, you will build a legacy for others that come behind you, and you are also going to dream others into existence. And this is not, listen, this doesn't have anything to do with parenthood. A lot of times it has to do with mentor protege relationships, that you have a dream of people who are coming behind you, who are going to pick up your vision and they're carry it on. But the thing is, endings are not, they're not happy, and they're not sad. Endings are pivots in time. What they are, they're forks in the timeline. And all this represents, endings represent a transition of one timeline to another. It ends one possibility and creates another. And there are infinite possibilities. There are infinite timelines. And the thing is that once you transition from one timeline to another, whether it be through a change of life or whether it be the demise of your natural life, that this is something, it's a pivot. It's not something that's inherently happy or sad. It's not even this is the other thing too, is that endings are not containers. They're transitions. And when we take endings and we make them containers, and we say that, okay, we're expecting the end of something to look like this. People plan out what they want the end of their life to look like, and that's fine. But understand that this is not something, that it's not really an event that should be over emotionalized. And don't get me wrong, I think that births should be celebrated, and I think that deaths should be mourned. But it's not so much that we're demarcating a time, a particular point in time. It's just that this is a pivot into something else. So now what we're doing is we're ushering in, when a birth comes, we're ushering in a celebration of what this, the potential of this new life. Likewise, if someone dies, we celebrate the legacy of that life. But do you see, the key word here is celebrate? And not even celebrate. Let's say if we take celebrate out, because celebrate, it has some emotional connotations, but let's just say that we simply acknowledge, that we acknowledge a new life coming into the world, or we acknowledge the passing of the flame of a life of a loved one. We acknowledge it, but then we move on. Why? Because the story doesn't end. There is no happily ever after. There is an ever after, and the ever after gets rewritten every time until another pivot happens. And why is this all important? Because again, what happens is like we're coming up on the end of another year. And we think about this year and all of the things that happen. And some of us will say, I'm really looking forward to 2023. And there are going to be others that say, man, I'm glad 2022 is gone. And in either case, what you're doing is you're either looking backward or looking far forward. And understand this, that on the journey is just like in a car, the windshield is much bigger than the rear view mirror because where you're going is far more important than where you've been. But when you're looking at transitioning, you also have to remain in the moment. Because to extend the car analogy, if you're driving and you get too preoccupied with your destination instead of being in the moment of where you are in the car right now, you could very well crash. And that could give you problems. So the thing is, you want to always be in the moment, not looking back, not obsessing. I'm not saying not looking ahead, but not obsessing on what's ahead. But be here now. Be here now. What does that mean? Enjoying the moment. See, I know, like I've had these situations in my life where I had a loved one where they said, "Okay, that time of transition is upon us," and you start getting the sense of foreboding, and you start thinking about, "Man, I really need to spend more time with this person. I need to really focus in on my time, my relationship with them." But um,